All right, I'm going to call this meeting to order. First up is roll call. Council at Large Cummins.
Here.
At Large Postian.
Here.
Council Ward number 1 Hembry.
Here.
Ward number 2 Helm.
Here.
And Ward number 3 McNeil.
Here.
All right, so the pledge and the flag is over here. All right, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. All right, the agenda. If there are no additions to the agenda, can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion.
Cummins with the first and Postian with the second.
Cummins. Yes. Hembry.
Yes.
McNeil.
Yes. Yes.
Postian.
Yes.
Helm.
Yes.
All right, communications. If anybody would like to address the council, you can make your way to the podium. Seeing there are none, I'll close that portion of the meeting and we'll move down to city business, which we only have one item tonight, and it's discussion and possible action concerning a presentation of the solar feasibility study. Mr. Wagner?
Yes. In a minute, I'll turn it over to Dave, who's here with LEV Energy Advisors. Dave did the feasibility study and will be presenting his results tonight. This started as an idea that with rising wholesale energy charges that the city and therefore our ratepayers have to pay, could we come up with a way that, if not immediately, would at least over time supplement the power that we buy wholesale? And the question came up, would it be possible to put in a solar array that would cut the cost of what we purchase for power from our wholesale provider, or RPGI is their initials or abbreviation? Could it be cut enough to where the savings for not paying for the wholesale power could be put into repayment on a loan that would construct a solar array? And then, of course, once you get past the debt, then hopefully beyond some maintenance that would be involved, the benefit would then hopefully be realized in an even greater amount. The council hired LEV to look at two scenarios. The first one, the primary one, was for the approximately 11 acres that the city owns north of the wastewater treatment facility, or now we refer to it as the Sager. The other possibility was with the upgrade and expansion of the wastewater facility, would a standalone solar array down by the new water treatment facility be feasible to help offset some of the cost of electricity needed to run that facility? So the council decided to look at both scenarios to see what might make the most sense, if either one made sense. And we originally looked at having this report done, well, maybe 2 or 3 weeks earlier, but the study wasn't quite ready. Plus, there's been a development in the new Inflation Reduction Act that looks like it would be a benefit to a project like this, making it more feasible. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Dave. I'll let you introduce yourself and then carry forward with your results.
Oh, okay, yeah. Yeah, I'm Dave Robinson with LEV Energy Advisors. We're also the energy advisors to the Resale Power Group of Iowa. And actually, I'll be the one who actually develops the pricing for the Resale Power Group of Iowa when they refresh their pricing that they'll be doing here shortly in September for pricing that takes effect in 2023 and 2024. So, you know, based off my knowledge, you know, how RPGI bills its customers, you know, I was able to look at a feasibility study, you know, for both of the sites, the wastewater treatment site, as well as the others, the 11-acre site. And following up on that, you mentioned, you know, one of the pretty big change that we saw in the Inflation Reduction Act that got enacted, or well, it's going to get signed by President Biden here sometime this week. It's on Friday, and the Senate had passed it earlier in the week. So it kind of came as a surprise to a lot of people. Because one of the big things with solar is for municipalities as well as nonprofits is they can't take advantage of the tax credits. There have been a couple of RPGI members that have installed their own solar, one of them being State Center and the other one being Farmers Electric Co-op, have both installed solar to save off their bills. But again, in order to capture some of those tax credits, they had to enter into a financial arrangement with the bank. Purchase power option where they are actually able then to buy out of the purchase power agreement, you know, after so many years, and the other entity then could claim the tax credits. So kind of at a high level then, you know, I looked at this analysis that I've provided is looking at spending $2 million on a 1 megawatt solar installation at that 11-acre site. And again, you know, the financial benefit is going to be to offset the RPGI bill. And that not only includes the cost of the wholesale power, but within your billing from RPGI, it includes the cost of transmission as well. So you would have some offset of those transmission costs too. And you're probably aware that those transmission costs have been increasing every year as well. This system we anticipate would be directly connected to your distribution system. So we don't, you know, envision this having to be connected directly to the transmission system. So when you connect in to your distribution system, you would be offsetting the power that would otherwise flow through your metering with RPGI, and in which your billing is based off of. So really what you're looking to do is offset your bills from RPGI through that metering point with your distribution system. You know, on the two different applications I looked at, you know, I was able to get your hourly load data for RPGI, provided me what your hourly load data was, and I was able to compare that hourly load data to what the production would be for the solar wastewater treatment plant, as well as the new site, the 11-acre site. And when we determine the generation output from the solar, we use a system, or a modeling system called PV watts, to estimate what we estimated that production would be on an hourly basis. You know, every hour of the year, 8,760 hours a year. We look, and so that we're able to determine both the offset to your kilowatt hours, you know, your monthly, as well as your maximum demand each month, because RPGI bills you for the maximum demand you set each month that's coincident with the RPGI peak, as well as the amount of energy or your kilowatt hours each month. The capacity factors for the solar are typically 18 to 22% of capacity factor. And what that means is when you look at the nameplate 1 megawatt generator, if that operated every hour of the year at 1 megawatt, that would be 100% capacity factor. Well, solar doesn't operate at every hour of the year, you know, for so many hours during the day. So 18 to 22% of the hours that it would be operating. And not only do we look at, and that's just trying to calculate out how much energy you would offset. But we also, the thing about solar is that it's gonna be more coinciding with when you set the maximum demand for the city. So the closer it's operating to when you set your maximum demand for RPGI billing, the more you're gonna offset your demand charges for RPGI. So typically what you see for solar is they're gonna operate anywhere from 30 to 50%. Did my analysis, I went through each and every for a 2.5 year period to calculate what I would estimate you would have for an offset demand. The solar profile or the solar generation profile is typically going to be midday. So it'll be, like from 11 o'clock to 2 o'clock. And a lot of times your system peak or the time that the city is going to have its maximum demand per month might be later in the afternoon. It might be after 2 o'clock, or, later towards the evening, kind of depending on, when residential customers start coming home and turning on their air conditioning. The other thing I assume is solar has an annual degradation factor, so that each year it's in operation, it reduces the amount that it'll, as far as the maximum. And I assumed it was about a 0.5 of a percentage point. I've seen that consistent, for example, with the solar filing that Interstate Power and Light filed for its 400 megawatts of solar. I mean, it's consistent with the degradation that they're assuming for that. I also assume the solar panels will have a 25 to 30-year life, before they either have to be replaced or decommissioned. And then the other thing that I assumed is the life of the inverters and the takes the DC generated, the direct current that's generated from the solar panels, and converts it to alternating current. And that's what your inverters do. And then that's the power that flows up onto the distribution system, because your distribution system is inverters convert the direct to alternating current, but the life of those inverters are not as long as the solar panels. They're generally about half as long as the solar panels. So one of the things that I looked at in my analysis is assuming that you have to replace your inverters, midway through the life of the solar panels. And the other thing, as far as the amount of generation you're going to have, is it really going to depend on the solar radiance, and so that when we did the PD watts modeling, we did this specific geographic location, and based off that geographic location, we can make an estimate on what we think that solar generation will be. So based off the solar radiance at that location. I got a couple of maps in the analysis that show kind of what the state of Iowa looks like in comparison to the nation, as well as what Tipton looks like. And you can see it's, when you get towards the southwestern side of the state, you have a lot more solar radiance than what you see up in the northeast quadrant. But that doesn't mean it precludes anybody, because, you have a lot of solar all the way up to Winnebago County, Dubuque, scattered throughout Iowa. So I have an analysis where I took a peek, trying to figure out what kind of demand reduction we're going to see. That's kind of what that load curve is. So I looked at every hour of the day, and I took what your load is during that every hour of that day, and that was on July 29th last year. It was a peak day for you. And I compared what the solar profile would look like as far as an offset. So what would happen then is your overall demand, and it kind of shows the solar profile for that day and how it coincides to when you have the maximum that you're going to be requiring, and what kind of offset you will see for that. That directly translates into what you're going to see for an offsetting demand charges from resale power to the provider. So then can see that the next thing is, the solar generation, your maximum solar generation is gonna be, from like May through September with June and July, amounts for when you're gonna have your solar generation versus the other times of the year. And so, we were able to calculate out, how much generation you're gonna have from the solar panel for each and every month of the year. The next just shows the site of the proposed solar array. Um, so Probably the next thing, and this has kind of been the big scene since probably about April, is really related to the pricing of solar panels. What happened was there was there's been some supply chain disruptions due to COVID-19 since most of the solar panels are produced from Southeast Asia and China. And the Department of Commerce had, the Trump administration had imposed a tariff on the importation of solar panels from China. And as a result of that, there could be taxation as high as 250% of the cost of the solar panels. So what they believe happened then is to circumvent that, some of these Southeastern Asian nations were getting the components or the materials from China sent to these like Vietnam or other Southeastern nations, Southeastern Asian nations, and they were doing the assembly there, and then they were shipping the panels back to the United States. Well, the Department of Commerce got a complaint about that from a solar manufacturer in California. So they opened an investigation into that. And that kind of put a lid on some of the importation of solar panels coming from that area, because they were afraid that the people buying those solar panels would get hit with a tax of 250% of the cost of the solar panels. So that impacted the price for solar panels. And actually, in the proceeding I was involved with for Reliant Energy, in April, they asked for an extension in their proceeding with the utility board because they saw the impact of the pricing impacting their panels. And they filed a revised filing with the utility board where they said, hey, our costs have increased 30%. As a result of that, they saw an increase in their panel cost cap that they have to have approved by the utility board to not demonstrate some additional requirements. And right now, that cost cap that they're proposing is right at $2,000. So it's gone up from about $1,700 to $2,000. Commerce, though, is supposed to have a preliminary ruling on that by the end of this month. So based off that, they're going to know what's going to happen going forward. But again, in the short term, it's led to a lot of increase in the pricing of solar. So as far as financing that, you can either finance it, or, you can do a purchase power arrangement. The purchase power arrangements we were seeing, though, previously were for, especially for municipalities and nonprofits, was for another entity to take the tax credits for both either the production tax credit or the investment tax credit. But inflation, the investment tax credits, nonprofits, whereas before they had to go through a taxable entity. And based off the legislation, as I understand it right now, there's they're looking at two different alternatives as far as being able to get the first tax credit is the investment tax credit, and that's 30% of the installed cost of the solar array. So that substantially reduces the cost of the project. Because you're not taxable, though, the alternatives are you can sell those tax credits off to an unrelated third party. But the other alternative they're offering for municipalities is you can do a direct pay option too. But because you don't file an income tax, the Treasury Department or the IRS is gonna have to come out with some guidelines or forms that you would have to file as far as getting that returned as a tax credit to you. Again, I anticipate those guidelines and those requirements to come out later in the year. As far as the 30% tax credit, there's two different tiers for that make up that 30%. One of the requirements though is that it has labor costs that are at like the local market cost for labor. Requirements to get the vast majority of those investment tax credits. And there's some additional incentives that they can offer on top of that, but some of them are going to be a little bit more difficult to get. You get another 10% on top of the 30% if you're able to get the solar panels from a U.S. manufacturer, which is kind of limited because there's not a lot of U.S. manufacturers. The other thing is you can get a 10% addition on top, so you could get a total of 50% of investment tax credit. Is if it's like for designated low income area, or if it's a brownfield or something like that. But that's the investment tax credit. So that's a one-time credit you get, and you get that upfront at at the beginning, shortly after you install those. It goes into commercial operation. The other tax credit you can get is something called the production tax credit. And what that does is that looks at the amount of generation that you have on a monthly basis from those solar panels, and it gives you approximately 2.6 cents credit for every kilowatt hour that it generates. And it will do that for a 10-year time frame. And then there's the possibility within that 10 years that that 2.6 cents credit can be adjusted upward for inflation. So when I provided an analysis and I sent it to Brian this morning, I looked at the initial analysis, that didn't have these tax credits in there, just as if, you were going to finance it, and that showed that, you did not have a positive cash flow, for probably about half of the life of the solar. When you add in those tax credits, though, you add in those investment tax credits or the production tax credits, there's only, a short period of time where you wouldn't, have. So, so it's a big positive. There's still, um, solar vendors, that are willing to do purchase power arrangements too. And there's some different variations of that where, you could have a purchase power arrangement for the first 5 years, and then you buy out the solar panels from them, after that time frame, at market value. But then a lot of those were really structured for, the solar vendor would sell off, the purchase power arrangement to like a bank or something to harvest the tax credits on it. So, the other thing about the tax credits that just happened is that the investment tax credits are now back up to 30%. And for solar that goes in next year, had they not adjusted it, it would have been at 22%. So it'd be 22% of the cost of the installed solar installation would have been the tax credit. Now that's increased up to 30%. And it's going to stay at that 30% at least through 2025. And the other thing is, once you select one, investment tax credits or production tax credits, you can't switch that anymore. possible. We can sell it to a third party, or you can get the direct payment. I assume if you sell it to a third party though, the third party is probably not gonna give you 100% of what the investment tax credits are. You know, they might give you like 90% or something. So the direct pay option, once they give some definition on that, is gonna be a better option. But again, you know, it really depends when the Department of Treasury would say you would get that payment in the first year. And in the analysis, Maggie had provided me an amortization schedule for a loan. The loan options I looked at was that energy infrastructure revolving loan with a 2% reflected on the analysis for um, the first loan. And then the second loan was internal financing at a 1% interest rate. And both of those went for 15 years. I mean, there's some other incentives available for solar. You know, there's bonus depreciation if you know, you're a taxable entity, but again, there's nothing in regards to this recent legislation that provides that incentive to nonprofits. Another thing is, there's something called renewable energy certificates. And for example, there might be a company out there that wants to say there's so much renewable or whatever. There's a market for these renewable energy certificates. And they can go out and purchase these renewable energy certificates, as well as you can sell those renewable energy certificates. I think it's called the MREC system, where you register those water. So the thing about Iowa is the investor-owned utilities. There's a renewable portfolios required in Iowa, the investor-owned utilities, but they've all met it, and they've met it for a long time, especially with Mid-Am. I think Mid-Am now says they're, you know, over 85% renewable. Alliant, after this additional solar, is going to be, you know, 40-some% renewable. So, I mean, they don't really have an appetite to go out and purchase additional renewable energy certificates. So they're not in reform right now. So there's not a lot of value to them, but some value to them. So just, yeah, real quickly, I did a 25-year analysis. I estimated the cost of the RPGI bills to go up approximately 2% per year. Again, but I mean, again, you know, costs are kind of stepwise. Interest rate 2% 15-year for the energy loan, and 1% for the internal load. You used your 2021 loads, your hourly loads. And also, the other thing is, you know, you have a lot of value coming in from your contract from the Louisa generating station that helps offset some of your load. So I took that into account too when I did my analysis. RPGI, current demand and energy rates. But like I mentioned earlier, those rates are going to be revised starting in 2023. So probably won't know what those rates are probably till the first part of October. But again, you know, the analysis could be refreshed for what those revised rates are. The other thing about the solar system, you know, I assumed 1,000 megawatts DC. It was a single axis tracking system in comparison to a fixed panel. So, you know, it'll harvest more of the solar production. Pretty much covered everything else. I think the biggest thing in there is I assumed an installed cost of $2,350 per kW. And I had some discussions with some other solar vendors about what they were seeing for costs. And I compared it to what I saw the cost for a utility scale solar. And like I mentioned earlier, you know, Alliant is saying for a 400 megawatt utility scale, slightly, you know, below 2,000. So it kind of made me think, well, you're not utility scale, you're more commercial size, so it would be higher than that. But again, I think the only way you're really gonna get the true cost of what the cost of the solar is gonna be is if you do an RFP and get bids, or it's, specific to your location. So, and I mentioned earlier though, I mean, I think right now, I ran two different scenarios for the 1 megawatt solar. I had ran the initial analysis where I didn't assume that you'd get any investment tax credits or the production tax credits. And, when I looked at the cash flow on that, it was positive over the 25 years, but it doesn't turn positive till about midway through. The investment tax credit though makes a big difference. Because, the first or second year, you're gonna have a big positive cash flow. And then you're gonna have a positive cash flow throughout. That's a big change. The production tax credits, the first couple of years, you don't have a positive cash flow with that. But it does turn positive, but it's not as, the same magnitude as an investment tax credit. But again, that could improve because I assume an 18% capacity factor. Well, depending on the solar panels, the inverters, you might be able to get a better capacity factor. So the better the capacity factor, the production tax credits might provide more value. So are there any questions so far?
Well, maybe one to start with. You looked at 2 megawatt, 1 megawatt. There's around 11 acres there. Let's take the example of a 1 megawatt scenario. How much area out of the 11 acres would you assume 1 megawatt would take up? Just roughly.
Fixed, not the single axis. By the way, Scott Prohaska with One Source Solar out of Ankeny. Just here is Q&A to help with questions specific to solar. Typically on a fixed ground array, so it's not the single axis tracker, you're about almost 3.2 acres per kilowatt or per megawatt. And depending what you have for fencing around it, and such around the array, but so figure 3.5 acres per megawatt. With single axis tracker, north, south, east, west tracking, you're going to be it's probably a slightly more than that per megawatt. So with that 11, you should be fine up to 2, and depending on, you maybe could be in that 3 megawatt if you really wanted to max out that area.
So whether it's 1 or 2, there could be some area left.
I would sure think so.
I think-
it's easy to map.
I think-
out to see.
I think one of
You
the,
probably have to go out and check out the site.
Yeah.
See
Right, exactly, to see the topography and what
Right.
changes might need to be made and so forth.
I think one of the questions might be, there's a housing subdivision nearby. And how much of the 11 acres would need to be filled up? So it sounds like it isn't going to be jam-packed full of solar panels. Certainly if it's 1, and probably not if it's 2. Is that a fair statement for now?
If it's a fairly flat or, square parcel of land or what have you, then yes, I'd say that's a fair statement. And it's easy to take a quick glance on what that physical square footage would be.
And I think when it's close to residential too, we can get complaints about glare. Again, a site visit, it makes sense to kind of look at what the orientation of the panels were and, if there's a possibility of, maybe complaining about it.
So that area, if I remember right, north to south, it tends to slope downward. I don't know if that helps or hurts. But
Yeah, if you slope from the north to the south.
yes.
Again, if you're talking the fixed array, yes, you can then put the rows a little closer together and not create shading on the second row and so forth. If it's a single axis tracker, probably doesn't make a lot of difference, other than if you're too much slope, then you might have to do some groundwork first.
And I know there might be folks in the audience who have questions too, but another one I was wondering is, in another message you said you would assume that if the council pursues this, you'd suggest waiting at least until the fall to look and see what the solar market does, and then maybe look at an RFP then. Can an RFP be done where it gives two scenarios, 2 meg, 1 meg? Okay, so,
Yeah, of course.
so the council, if it makes sense, could either pick one or the other or neither. Okay.
And you just specify how you would like them to bid.
And, is there anything else in the design that went into this other than the tracking? Is there anything else in particular that's notable, in the assumed design of the equipment?
I mean, we just, depending on, who the vendor is and what they select for equipment, you might see some differences as far as capacity factor, the life of the inverters, some nuances like that.
If we were to try to figure out the full impact of these tax credits, who would we talk to? I mean, there must be a way to figure that out at some point. Do you have any idea?
Yeah, I mean, I anticipate, that you're gonna see some of these tax firms get involved with it, like PwC, some of these other ones, are gonna be providing tax advice. Because I know right now, I mean, if you don't file income taxes, you're gonna wanna know what to do. And I'm sure they're waiting on the guidance to come out from the IRS in order to advise their clients. The IMU, I'm sure there's gonna be other municipalities that are gonna start looking at this now, because it's gonna be so attractive for them. So, I mean, that's a possibility. I mean, we can go through some of our resources and some of the law firms that we deal with in Des Moines on the energy side too. So I'm sure there's gonna be a lot of activity now.
Did your design estimate, your cost estimate, assume anything about fencing?
No, it just kind of the standard, the electrical infrastructure and everything.
Right.
It's kind of rolled into that 2350.
Okay.
So it is in fencing and, all the underground electrical and everything like that. Right, yeah, it's kind of a turnkey cost.
Speaking of site, with Brian, Brennan, and Steve, and you here too, for some backstory, could you explain how we came to this site? Anybody else wants to join in?
We had, when the question came up, we had thought about some other areas. We were looking, at one point, we were looking at an area within town that had been known to be available for sale. And a lot of it was, or some of it at least, was floodplain, and we knew that the solar panels could be mounted higher than the floodplain. But then we thought in terms of, well, what if, does the city own any property that would be available? And upon first getting here, I didn't realize that the area that was being farmed north of the Sager was city property. It was, and I think the property owner to the north, who owns the other open area, thought also that it was his property because he had hired the farmer who was farming city property. And then we finally came to understand that it was city property. And we had thought about it in different ways. We wondered if it might be another housing subdivision, but then how would you get there? If nothing developed between South Street, getting down to us. The road that's there right now isn't a city street. It's really a utility access road. So then in looking at this project and since it's close to the wastewater plant, I guess my first thought was, well, can the wastewater plant benefit from a solar? Then I thought, well, what about the 11 acres? What could it do? We didn't really start to think very much about doing a solar array of that size until we went to an RPGI meeting in State Center, who built their own array. They put theirs by their wastewater facility, but their wastewater facility is a bit more removed from a residential area than this one might be, unless it's set back a ways. But then we started thinking, well, what would the impact be? You know, if you take the case of people who add solar panels to their home to reduce their residential energy cost, or like the grocery store to reduce their cost, this is just a different version of that. We're trying to reduce our cost. And so we started to think, well, could this 11 acres work there? You know, we didn't even realize we owned it until recently. So maybe there's a way that we could make it useful. And that's basically how I think the site came to mind.
Yeah, I've been to the state center side, on the other side, Highway 30 from the town, yeah, but, and they have some hills over there, I don't know if you've seen it or not.
Yeah.
The one thing, you know, kind of talking about how much solar's been put in now, the one thing to be cautious about though is you don't want to oversize it and then as a result then start back feeding into the transmission system. Once you start back feeding into the transmission system, you're gonna have to do an interconnection.
Now, in your study, the operation or setting up an array for the wastewater plant didn't fare as well.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that too. The load profile for the wastewater treatment plant is primarily, most of the load comes on in the winter. Is in the summer, so there wasn't a real good match. The other thing is when you offset the energy from the wastewater treatment plant, you know, what you build a wastewater treatment plant is really helps support the distribution system too. So it's, you know, it's just not the RPGI bill, it's, you know, your retail rate for Tipton too. So when you offset that, that then has to be made up by your other customers. So, you know, because of the solar profile, not matching up real good with the wastewater profile, as well as, you know, you have that issue where, you know, the other customers would have to make up the difference. It wasn't really a good application for it. I mean, you could probably do something smaller maybe.
Dave is doing a wonderful job. I'm Maggie with Spear, and I mean, all I want to make sure to point out is we ran a $2 million loan structure. As mentioned, 1.5 million is the maximum under that state revolving loan. So we'd be asking for the maximum. We'd be asking for 15 years because it's a 5 or a 10 year, pretty easy, a requested 15 year. So we'd be asking for a 15-year loan. And the other thing I wanted to point out was that internally, it does appear that the electric utility system has enough cash to do the offset of the other 500,000. So altogether, we're looking at a $2 million project cost before we talk about credits and any kind of, you know, rebate that would come back to you right away. That's what we ran the scenarios on for these. And that $500,000 internal loan, we did at a 1%. Have to charge yourself interest for an internal loan. We suggest that you would charge yourself interest because if you take $500,000 of cash flow out of the electric utility, and it's not really cash flow, we'll call it even reserves, it's going to be generating more interest than it ever has in the last 7 to 8 years. We're in a higher interest rate market where CDs can be purchased, money markets, money can be set in those types of funds. So although for the last 7 to 8 years, you have not generated a lot of interest, you will be generating. Interest rates have risen. So that's why we really suggest that you charge yourself interest. There's nothing in the code section that requires you to charge yourself interest. But if you're removing those dollars for 15 years, you probably should be getting something back in return on those. So it's really, I mean, we've been just going back and forth with Dave and your administration on what those numbers look like. And again, once we have a little bit more information, I agree. Once this bill is signed, it will be a rush for everybody to figure out the tax credit side of it. And there's gonna be more information coming out. Dave is very optimistic that the rules on the tax credits will come out this fall. He's an optimistic person. He's still in federal regulation all the time. Do you know there's no final rules yet technically on your ARPA money? So
Mhm.
that was a year and a half ago. So I just, FYI.
So can anybody say what exactly, how many years it's gonna take to pay this off? I mean, do we have that?
The target is 15.
15.
It would be 15 years to pay it off, and again, if you've got some positive cash flow, which the new tax credits give you some positive cash flow, you could pay your internal loan off a little sooner. I would assume the state revolving energy loan could be paid off sooner. I believe when we read the information on it, there were no prepayment penalties,
Right.
anything like that, that we looked at. So, as positive cash flow happens, those are the conversations to have. Do we take the positive cash flow and do something with it, or do we turn around and pay our debt off and try to eat away little by little and make it a 14-year loan or a 13-year loan altogether? But it was based on 15 years out of the 25-year life of the solar panels and system.
Okay.
Right.
I think the point is, we won't know where it would land for Tipton as far as feasibility goes until we understand how these new tax credits work and until we go out for an RFP resulting in bids. We just won't know until we do those things.
Yeah, I agree. So it sounds like potentially it's probably something that's gonna get tabled tonight until more information comes out or until the legislation passes, so we know what that is. But my question for Dave or Scott or both is there some similar size systems and our projections? We don't know that, we're looking at projections. It's nice to look at an example that's out there. Do you have any? Know the actual cost, the actual revenues. I know theirs will be a little different. Inflation changes, but. Yeah, I mean, state centers are projected. Think about project one of the first ones to do it somewhere and here with us as far as what they borrowed and how much or cash flow. Yeah, I mean. Both of those are done quite a while back too, and solar costs have been higher.
Most of the larger installs, there's NIAC has 2.5 megawatts, but it's all offsetting their demand, and they're used through a utility company that has a net metering policy that's different than what you're seeing here. And a lot of the private generation is a little different than going through projects, so we can show you cost and installation cost. Typically, haven't seen any financials, but typically when you look at if a person was able to get that 30% project incentive and so forth, you're probably on paper penciling out quicker than the 15 years that the loan shows, but you have that cost of money. So I think there is that positive cash flow that could definitely get that reduced, if you choose to take some of that positive cash flow and prepay some of that loan, or those loans. At least from my experience, and what the per watt cost and per kilowatt cost, as you had mentioned, see that positive cash flow probably much quicker than. But it is unknown right now, and it's just literally in the last 3 days or 4 days since Friday, the unknown is, because even if you read in the bill, it says non-taxable entities might qualify. Well, what's the might mean? So until that's defined, it is gonna be a little bit, you know, doesn't apply, because if it applies, it makes a considerable difference to that cash flow, as you had pointed out. Not even see the numbers, I just know from other projects, it makes a significant difference.
Maggie?
Yeah, the ITC, so the ITC's version with the $500,000 like tax, like right up front, you get the tax incentive upfront of 550,000. So just assume you could take away the 550,000, it's 550,000 coming to you, you could then eliminate the borrowing of the internal loan, right? Like you could pay yourself back immediately. That at a 1% is $33,000 a year, that loan, 33 to 34,000. And then after that initial year, your negative cash flow is 31 to 35,000. So right there, just eliminating that part of the project, taking you down to a borrowing of only 1.5, probably teeters you on that break even or that positive, small positive cash flow at least in those first 15 years before you get it all paid off. So that's just something to think about from that ITC perspective of 30%
Jason,
right up front.
is that what your question kind of was too? Like how much profit would it have to bring in to break even every year?
Basically, yeah.
Okay.
Is the ITC available right now, or are we still waiting on that?
That's what I believe is in the act that's gonna get signed. That we're assuming is gonna get signed, we're pretty positive.
Is this all figured in, like maintenance fees per year? I'm assuming with
Yeah,
everything,
Yes.
there's
on the
maintenance
outside,
fees.
maintenance
Correct.
costs, as well as replacing the inverters.
I have another question about the site and how that would look. You mentioned glare at one point, or you did, sorry. I'm assuming that's why most of the homeowners are here too, because I'm guessing that they'd be for this if it saves them money on their utility bill. But have you guys done projects this close to residential areas, and how has that worked out for them? And
My perspective, in most cities have, some cities, and, thinking around the Des Moines metro area, everyone has policy in place, whether it's Urbandale, West Des Moines, Waukee, et cetera, to where obviously rooftop arrays, but they also have ground arrays available within city limits. You don't see glare. I mean, at one point in time, if you look just right, you might see something, but these are installed next to airports. And if there's gonna be a concern there, they have anti-glare on the panels themselves. But yeah, they're a tempered glass. But at the same token, the glare factor is usually something that never comes up, because it's usually a non-issue from that standpoint.
They point southwest anyway, don't they?
Straight, your optimal is straight south, but if you do a single axis, then they're gonna be laid basically end to end, north to south, and they'll follow the sun east to west. As the sun goes throughout the day, and then reset at night and start over. But a fixed ground array in Iowa, your optimal install is 30 degrees straight south, 180 degrees as we. Yes, I'm sure we can come up. I know down in Missouri, the one project that's approved for 150 megawatt solar project is on the airport ground. And Mason City solar at their airport as well, but there is across the country also.
yeah, okay.
I guess I'm a little unclear on the tax incentive and rebates. Is this something we apply for, or is it just, it's a given if we ask for it?
It would come to you. So that's just an issue.
No, she means for the city.
Yeah.
If that's in that bill.
Yeah, it's still unclear to your
Yeah.
first question.
Okay.
So it's very clear for a taxable entity, like you personally or business or anything of that nature. It's very clear today's tax code as well as the future bills. It's the only really gray area, I shouldn't say only, because this bill brings into a lot of account, like you said, if it's low income and different things, how does that qualify? So there's a few more gray areas, but it's very gray when it's a non-taxable entity, like a city municipality, how that's gonna look. It really is.
And that's part of the bill, and the way the bill is written is to benefit things like cities, but again, they just have to come out of it and then.
And then we just ask
They
for
get
it,
the
and
rule.
it's,
Right.
it's a done. I just also want to say, I don't know that you really answered the, have you had any located close to
Oh.
subdivisions or homes?
Yes, and yes, so there's private and self-generation or on-site generations throughout towns across the country. But if you're looking at just Iowa and projects we've been involved with, yes, there are several, individual solar arrays that happen to be ground mounted, which would be the closest to a glare concern, or visible, just visibility and aesthetics concern in general. There's very large retirement homes that have large arrays that have, have developments all around them. So it somewhat depends on the city and any kind of ordinance you might have in place and that type of thing.
I guess my concern is not the glare, because I think the way the land lays, it's gonna face away from the homes. Mine is more about health issues or devaluation of our properties.
Health issues, I can't speak to the property side of things. That's something, most of these arrays, I mean, they're required to have a fence around, and obviously you can do
And what kind of-
landscaping, 6-inch or 6-foot fence around them.
Like wire fence?
It could be multiple different styles, but typically wire is what most use. But you'll see a lot of times you'll have trees and different things planted on the north side or the sides of them if they don't grow too tall to offset some of that aesthetic. So it just depends how, how the property wants to be looked at. From a hazardous side, a solar module is 100% recyclable. I mean, it's tempered glass, it's aluminum frame, it's a little bit of copper in the internal wiring, and it's silicon, ingots or squares, which is a national element. So there's no toxics. Years and years ago, the panel technology, they said there was fraction of lead in them, but that's many, revelations of technology evolving since. So no concerns from that standpoint.
But has it affected property values?
Yeah, I can't speak to that.
I can talk about the Alliant project. They actually had to do, as part of Lynn County has an entire process. One of the things that they have to do is they have to go out. Property values, but again, it was a rural area.
I guess I also would like to add to Jason's question about the maintenance with the payback. And you mentioned that one of the parts, the infiltration or something, only lasts 12 years. Yeah. What does something like that run? And is that figured in?
Yeah, I figured that in. And
So the components themselves, to expand on that a little bit, and if we don't answer your question, make sure we come back to it. Like the modules themselves, they carry a minimum of a 25-year production, right? So when you say the life of the system, 25 years, that's under warranty. So their longevity is, can be longer than that, of course. The inverters, standard inverter warranty is typically 12 years, some are 15 years. You can buy extended in certain cases, but with the larger wattage, shouldn't say wattage, larger voltage type regulators, it can be, fairly expensive, so you probably wouldn't look at that. But nonetheless, they're still under warranty for that 12-year. Typical life expectancies in that 18 to 20 year, right? So again, like you said, close to half or just over maybe half of the system. Where you run it, and so other than that, there's no moving parts for a typical fixed ground array. So you do have those electronics that could need to be replaced, but to that point, there's very little annual maintenance, right? With rain and snow and natural cleaning agents and so forth, and yeah, there's mowing and maintenance around the fence and those types of things. If you look at single axis tractors, that does improve the efficiency of the production. So you get more production out of the same acre of ground or 3 acres that you would from the other, but you're adding motion to it as well. So now you could have motors and different things that might need to be maintained or replaced, and so forth. So that is part of the equation when you look at it. When you get projects that are from 1 to 10 megawatts or 1 to 5 megawatts, probably is better. And that's maybe our personal opinion as a company, but you're on that borderline. Is it better to do a fixed type of rate without the motion and maintenance? Or is it better to get more production and do a single axis tractor? You're kind of right in that threshold of that size. Anything over that size, you're almost always gonna see the tractor. It just depends where you're at in that range. So, I don't know if that answers some of your question, but just kind of elaborate on the warranties of the equipment, because that's, without having motion, they do have some pretty longevity in terms of warranties because they're minimal motion.
Property, because I did some reading on this, and property downward. Wildlife is very quietly, but it does do this.
I guess I can't speak to the property, I just stepped in and talked to the solar piece, but, that is definitely something obviously everyone wants to look at, of course. When you look at those larger inverters, when they first start up, you might hear a hum if you're standing within 3 or 4 feet from it. I don't know of anything that you can hear more than 5 or so feet from it.
So I live right there, so I don't know how far up the hill you're gonna come with it, but I homes, and also 12 years ago, when I purchased that ground, there was never anything that would be built to the south of the home because of the airport and the lagoon. I don't know. Also, I read that disposal of these panels is very costly to the landfill.
There's recycling places for all of that. So it's not like you see with the turbines and those types of things. This is, there's a lot of recycle facilities that you see for all panels. So.
And I would say from an assessor standpoint, I can't talk to the assessor, but the assessor is not gonna go it alone. They're gonna call other counties and talk to them about what they've done, and if there's been, we have some pretty strict laws in Iowa about assessments that maybe other states don't have. So I always caution people when you're reading about what's going on, and if you're not reading about it in Iowa, there's a lot. I mean, we have an office in Chicago, and I was just like, they just like do their own thing, right? So we have strict things in Iowa. So I would say from the assessment standpoint, it's definitely a conversation you could have with the county assessor. They're gonna be the ones that would do it. They're gonna look within their own county, and if they don't have other solar arrays of similar size close to neighborhoods, then they're gonna go out and they're gonna ask the other surrounding counties, and at the Iowa County Association of Assessors group, they're gonna ask all those people what they're doing and what that looks like, and if that really is detrimental to, property values, so.
But they probably don't have enough information to make a determination like that now. They'd probably wanna see, for example, like if it went out for proposals, they'd probably wanna see a site plan. Because you really can't generically say, well, this might happen, and they would need more information before they would give any kind of determination, I would think.
Yeah, because they're gonna look at it from the same standpoint of, well, if we put a laundry mat within 900 feet of your property, what does that look like? Versus, are we gonna put a solar array within 500 feet of your property, 900 feet? So they're gonna want a site plan to see exactly how far away that actually is going to be. Is it up a hill, over a hill? Can you see it from your first level? Can you see it from your second level of your house? Things like that.
It's only about 3.5, 4 acres for this project, correct?
Yeah, that's just, again, I'm more so on the fixed side. I guess I can't speak to the exact amount that would be needed for that single access.
For
I
one-
would think
one
very
lane.
similar.
For one thing going.
Yeah, I would think very similar.
Any other questions? Tim, online, do you have any questions?
No.
All right.
Well, I mean, you don't have, and you don't have to decide anything tonight. I mean, I guess one thing we could do is, hold off until there's more to report.
I guess also with the legislation coming, it sounds like it'll be, if the council wants to go through with this, sounds like it, in general, it's gonna be a big rush from other entities. So what steps would we need to take to make sure we're like at the head of the line?
I mean, if you're looking at an RFP, I would start working on what you would want for an RFP. Like, for example, I'm working with another nonprofit, and I think we're anticipating to issue the RFP sometime in the mid-fourth quarter. So, I mean, it's kind of trying to line up when we think, we're gonna see some reduction in panel prices, as well as, seeing the tax legislation, so, and I don't know what your lead time is for putting things.
Possibly, yes. And a lot of that does have to do, companies look at doing a lot of bulk module purchasing and that type of thing. But, when you're looking at a megawatt like that, you're looking at 5,000 modules. So you gotta be prepared and with all the other jobs that the companies that are gonna be bidding on this have going. You're typically 3 to 4 months after that RFP before they really get going in the construction. So it'll likely be springtime, which good from a weather standpoint as well.
We were just discussing that, getting back to the mayor's comment about being ready. The possibility of having the council consider going ahead and develop the RFP, and so it's ready. Doesn't mean you have to issue it. But do you remember what that was quoted as? Was that?
I don't think we've quoted that yet, developing the RFP.
Oh.
I think we said that would be in addition to what.
Oh, okay. Then.
Right, but I mean, right now where you're at, we haven't hit the whole threshold of what we're quoting either.
Okay. Well, for the.
But I mean, I can give you a quote for an RFP because I just did one for another.
Well, if the council's interested, we could have it on the agenda for your regular meeting next Monday. And you could see what it comes in at for a proposal.
Abby's nodding loudly.
That's what I mean, yeah, we've gotta know what that's gonna cost.
Yeah. Over here, just get a quote on how much. Yeah. Pam?
I have one more question, and I feel like I'm coming in a little late on some of this, but I understand that city's cost for their Are we looking at eventually reducing utility rates for customers, and how soon or when could that happen?
I don't know how to figure that yet.
But is that the direction we're gonna try and go with this?
Well, we'd have to look at the debt repayment, but I was hoping that at a minimum, it would hold off future increases.
And also, to me, it sounded like it keeps us in the summer instead of the city having to buy the contracted price at X amount. We could then have it at Y amount, at a little bit less. So it's not a utility, you guys, correct me if I'm wrong, it's not a utility reduction, it's you're not getting charged the full amount.
It's a way to hedge against your summer prices.
Does that make sense, Pam?
Yeah, I don't know that I feel clear on the answer, but, I understand what it said.
I would tend to agree that it's not maybe a rate reduction to the customer, but as we look at it and we look at expenses going up 2% on average on, most utilities, water, sewer, electric, I think that what you're trying to get at is if there's a positive cash flow of, that sharing of that power, then again, yes, it could hold off future rate increases. Because likely you're gonna have future rate increases no matter what. And this would be that piece that could help reduce the operating costs of the utility system.
All right, so I think everybody can get the proposal for the proposal?
RFP proposal.
Yes, and we'll have that in the packet for Monday. Does anybody else have any questions or comments? Then I think I'll close that portion of the meeting. Let me get back to my agenda. And takes us down to adjournment.
Motion.
Caution with the first and Cummins with the second.
McNeil,
Yes.
Washington,
Yes.
Helm,
Yes.
Cummins, Embry.
All right, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
No.